I remember we were both invited to speak at an AIDS community meeting in Huntsville, Ontario in April 1992. And at the end of his presentation, he got up there and kind of flung his arms up in the air and said, "You can't fight AIDS without fighting homophobia." This is to Huntsville in 1992, not exactly the most sympathetic place to gay and lesbian people.
Jay was hired to head up the AIDS Bureau, and it was really his vision at the time, which was 1991, I believe. His clinical vision, his understanding of community, his understanding of what was required for a holistic response to the AIDS, HIV concerns that really developed the AIDS Bureau, so that I don't think it could have been done without him.
I think one of Jay's lasting contributions was that he helped shape the AIDS Bureau as an entity within government that didn't just react to community, it actually engaged community. And you can see that in the way it behaves still, that you could go to Jay and you can still go to the AIDS Bureau and you're not talking to them as an outsider to an insider, you're talking to people who get it. And one of the things about Jay Browne is that you always knew in any conversation that he got it.
And he became a role model for me in terms of how government can be a vehicle for change, a vehicle for possibility, and a vehicle for articulating from a position of power what community voices are saying.
I think I met Jay first at OHTN. He'd just come on and I had been invited to be AIDS Action Now's representative on the committee, and I wondered what in the world this strange southern gentleman was doing trying to run this committee. But he soon exceeded all expectations.
He paid attention to the fact that we really did need a better drug plan. This was long before a Trillium drug plan ever existed, and we were rather dogged about that particular issue. And Jay did what he could do from his position inside to help nurture that idea along, including every now and then slipping us some information that he probably shouldn't have.
Because when the OHTN was having some troubled times, some very difficult times, Jay came in to rescue us. He took over as the interim executive director, and he really helped strengthen this organization and alter the course of this organization from sort of strictly administrative to being much more involved and much more community-driven and much more scientific in its approach.
Those are some of the major struggles over the last 15 years around AIDS, and I think he was in the center of almost all of them.
Well, Jay's biggest contribution to HIV field is his whole life, his devotion and work for social justice for those most vulnerable. When I say his whole life, it started when I think he was in the second grade, when he was raised by a black mammy in Ashland, Kentucky, and all of a sudden she couldn't come to his first communion in the church, so he was quite defiant about that and gave back all his first communion presents.
He was able to relate to everybody. I also recall him coming to a memorial service for a woman heroin addict who had died of AIDS, and he came to this small chapel in the Wellesley Hospital. The chapel was filled with many former and current junkies who knew this woman who had died. And Jay stood up and faced this chapel full of people and again declared in that wonderful Kentucky accent, saying that, "We're going to take care of you addicts." And he did.
He also validated the community response to HIV, which was a gigantic statement, unlike any other in Canada.
Taught us the importance of community involvement, of community engagement, allowing us an opportunity to meet with the people that this disease most affected and to tailor the kind of work that we were doing to make sure it met people's needs.
He has a unique ability to get people who really don't like each other to work well together, and in fact, after they're working well together, kind of enjoy it, which is really nice to see.
Shortly after that, I realized how brilliant he was to keep that group working, and even in spite of their differences, they could get along when it came to the work.
And he had a wonderful way with people everywhere, both within the ministry, within the government service, and certainly within the community, and definitely with the people who were affected by HIV/AIDS. So it was unique and invaluable.
He was not afraid to criticize.
I'd say his biggest flaw is he was always wanting us to do more, which led to a deep deterioration in my mental health. But I seem to get through that all right.
Jay is very humane.
But I think that Jay is the most authentically self-effacing person in Canada's struggle against AIDS.
Well, I heard about him first, and my first reaction I heard about him was this straight guy that was cool, working with all of these gay guys, and I had to put that together. And then I heard he was a social worker, and my background is social work, and social workers weren't particularly forthcoming at the beginning of the epidemic. However, in entered this man completely seeming to be without ego. And the things that struck me first was he carries a grace. He then struck me as carrying authenticity. And he also struck me as carrying a dignity, and not just a dignity of self, but a dignity for the epidemic and a dignity for the work that we were all doing.
What it's like to be with Jay in any capacity is to experience the healing that his unconditional love, empathetic love for me, for others. By that I mean he simply wants the best for you, even at his own expense. And just to give you another example of how far he will go with these animals, I came home one night on the patio. He was there, and he's very upset because the squirrel on our roof was so upset. It was a mother squirrel. And Jay spent over $1,000 trying to help the exterminators get the mother squirrel's babies out of our attic, you know. And I mean, it's all about everybody else. It's not really ever about him. So even with squirrels.
He has an abiding faith in people's better natures. And somehow he thinks that there's no problem that is so complicated that you can't help put even converging views together in the same room, and if you actually trust in people's better natures, you'll get a good result.
And I think he always tried to see the best in people. And one of his favorite lines that I often think of is we were in a discussion with somebody who was a physician who was saying something actually quite nasty about the ministry. And when we stepped aside, I said, Jay, did she just say what I think she said? And he said, I'm choosing to believe she said something different. And I have to say, I still use that myself.
I think that he genuinely puts the interests of other people ahead of his own and ahead of the state for whom he worked.
That he's always positive. You know, there's things that are going on in the world and challenges that whether it's something, a new issue that's emerged in the community, he was always not focusing on the negative, focusing on the solutions, trying to engage people to solve it in a very positive and engaging way. One
word I would use for Jay is disarming. Something about that southern drawl.
A southern gentleman with, or he hides behind the facade of a southern gentleman, right? Inside there's a crafty bureaucrat. But a crafty bureaucrat who's, I think, AIDS activists could always count on being on the right side, which is not the place that we can count on most crafty bureaucrats being.
He has an unusual ability to look helpless when he knows exactly what he's doing.
Yeah, Jay is always sincere, that's for sure. And but at the root of it, isn't that what charm is, right? Connecting and understanding a person's perspective.
He said, we must do something about that. And that notion of possibility was one of the great gifts that he brought to HIV.
My dad is a fantastic organizer. He plans and strategizes different ways to accomplish things, like how to keep the puppies in a certain part of the house, and he creates different gating systems and certain rugs and places, and he orchestrates a whole plan in his head, and then he executes it, and he goes at it until he's successful.
He always made me feel like the work that I was doing really made a difference. And I think that inspires everyone to just work harder. I would never, ever want to disappoint Jay.
He's taught me a ton, and really somebody that I absolutely look up to.
Well, I'd say I've learned just about everything from Jay. I think for those of us who've been working in HIV for a long time, I think we all know that Jay was at the root of the provincial response in Ontario to HIV, and the AIDS Bureau today, I think, and I certainly hope, we've been able to carry on the same sort of quality of work.
I've been very fortunate to have Jay around when I was initially starting in the role of the scientific and executive director, and actually it's because of him and his thinking, creative thinking about where the OHTN was. And the OHTN was at a place, I think, where it had plateaued and needed to change. I think Jay really came in as an interim director and thought about where's the OHTN and where it needs to go, allow it the opportunity to grow and connect more with community.
He inspired me to be a great cook, and I love food and passionate about food, and my dad would work the spices, and he was always a fantastic cook and would handle the Thanksgiving. And
well, Jay was a crier, and he would, reasonably or understandably so, when things got bad, when someone was sick, he would just burst into tears. And that always touched me a lot.
And he never cries because he's been hurt. He never cries because he's sad or angry. But he always cries when he's so deeply touched by what someone else did, by someone's story, by someone's predicament.
Jay is a very emotional person, and he gets very moved by things, and often it's about compassion and caring. It's sometimes an empathetic response to upsetting things that are related to HIV. So that I think was very unusual, and still is unusual for people working for the government to feel the freedom and the ability to show that much emotion. But it was draining on us. We had to spend a lot of money on Kleenex.
I think Jay's legacy is actually getting people to actually talk together. And, the OHTN is a multi-stakeholder driven organization, and I think fundamentally, he's the kind of person that was always right in the middle of trying to bring people together and get them talking.
I don't think anyone else really could have done it.
And is leaving a tremendous legacy in his two sons, Joe Browne III and Dylan Thomas Browne I, both very, very, very much like him in the sense of goodness, caring for others, and working out ways to provide to those least advantaged. I'm very proud of them both, but I can see Jay very much in both of them.
Dad, don't cry. You got this one. Don't get emotional. You'll be okay. No, I'm kidding. It's your party. You can cry if you want to.